with Dave Asprey, the author of the Better Baby book, How to Have a Healthier, Smarter, Happier, and Healthier Baby, and the founder of Bulletproof Executive, the cutting-edge information site, podcast, blog, and much, much more. As many of you know, Dave, his story is really unique, and we're going to learn much, much more about that tonight. But he's a Silicon Valley investor and technology entrepreneur, and he basically invested over $500,000 traveling the world and spent a lot of time and money trying to enhance his own cognitive performance. And in so doing, he lost 100 pounds and improved his IQ and much, much more. So Dave is going to share that story with us tonight and hopefully help us all achieve the state of being bulletproof. So Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Mike, it's an honor to be here with you and to be presenting to all of the people who are listening. Thank you for your time. Is my screen visible to you?
Yeah, it looks great to me.
So I'm the CEO and founder of the Bulletproof Executive, and I'm an author of a book called The Better Baby book, and soon I'll be author of the Bulletproof Diet, which Rodale is publishing in December of this year. The Better Baby book was about epigenetics and about what you can do before and during pregnancy to increase the intelligence and basically potential of your own children. I'm host of the #1 rated health podcast we just talked about, Bulletproof Executive Radio. My blog gets, in combination with Facebook, about 2 million people a month. So it's become a place where people go to learn not about health, but about how to feel good, how to perform well. Because I've run the anti-aging nonprofit group called Silicon Valley Health Institute for 10 years, I learned that the only people who care about health are sick people, and the only people who care about youth are old people. And I say that as someone who was old when I was young and has had a lot of health challenges. And it always frustrated me that I didn't know how to get the attention of the people who could benefit most by taking care of themselves, preventative maintenance, instead of fixing problems. And the language and the positioning behind the Bulletproof Executive is, how do I help people with the least amount of work? And it's people who aren't sick and aren't old yet. If I can keep them from getting old or keep them from getting sick, it's just a better use of time. My background is Silicon Valley. I'm the first guy to sell anything over the internet. I sold caffeine t-shirts out of my dorm room to pay for my undergraduate studies in computer science. I'm a systems thinker and literally worked in computer security for many years. I think like a hacker. You show me an obstacle and it's my job to get around it. I did that for my own health. I lost 100 pounds that way, for instance. I'm an angel investor. I work with some of the early quantified self startups. I am a coach for very senior executives and a few Hollywood people, helping them not on medical things at all, because, well, I'm not licensed for that and that's not what I do, but helping them figure out what can they change in their daily practice so that they perform better. And oftentimes they do have energy issues or brain fog issues or undiagnosed thyroid problems, at which point then it's time to talk with your doctor. But in the meantime, what should you eat so that you'll feel better all day and you won't forget your lines? For instance, Jeremy Piven, the guy from Entourage, drinks bulletproof coffee. He uses bulletproof techniques in order to have more energy on stage. Third Eye Blind, the band, drinks bulletproof coffee and does a ton of the recommendations on the site, the ones that are all free, in order to have tons of energy on stage and in the recording studio. And the list goes on, but people who are really at that top 1% of performance where they just want to get everything they can out of life, they're using the knowledge here, and this is stuff that I did for myself because I wasn't working well. And I'm a human guinea pig. I've been doing this for quite a while, and if you're not willing to experiment on yourself and accept the results and document them and understand what they are and talk about them, then I just don't think that you're really living life as a human being. I know patient compliance can be a major issue. I'm married to a Karolinska-trained emergency room physician, and we talk quite a lot about this sort of thing. How do you get people to do the right thing? And I believe that being a human guinea pig and being willing to look at what worked and what didn't work and to believe what your body's telling you is critical as a patient. There's a big disclaimer here. Basically, I'm speaking for my own self. I'm not representing Zymogen. In fact, I'll tell you at least one thing that I'm going to tell you today is probably wrong, but I don't know it, and we don't know it yet. I really, really look for science to back up what I'm saying, and when I tell you something that I don't have a study for, I will do my very best to tell you there isn't a study. That said, nothing I'm doing here is a drug or diagnoses, treats, cures, or prevents, or has anything to do with any disease, because that would be wrong. So
Hey Dave, real quick. I'm seeing
Yeah.
your notes and such. I'm wondering if we
Oh.
go on the display settings, just so people can get a real. You have
Thank
some
you.
great pictures. Yeah,
I did not have any idea that you were doing that.
it's a cool hat, by the way.
Oh, thank you. It's quite fashionable. We're going to do this. Does this work better?
There we go. All right, full screen. Perfect. Thanks.
I'm so glad you told me that. What I do is called biohacking. The idea behind biohacking is that you have the ability to control your biology. There is science to it, and there is an art, a practice to it. And when you do this right, you change how you perform and how you feel. And yes, there are medical techniques. There are also nutritional techniques, things you can do with electronics, with big data, and even quantified self, where you just get data off of your own body, so that not only do you understand what you're feeling is real, but you can actually tell what worked and what didn't. And the end result of this is transformational. You do get stronger, you do get smarter, you do get faster, your sex hormones improve, and overall, this is about living life more fully, not about being healthier. If you look at me on the left, that's about 10 years ago. That's a photo that was published at least 100,000 times in a university catalog. I weighed about close to 300 pounds there. On the right, that's a relatively recent photo. I weighed close to 200 pounds there. The difference was about 10 years and about 250,000, and honestly, it's closer to 300,000 and a little bit beyond. And that photo was 10 years, and it's been more like 15 years. On the left, I was fat. The scary thing is what they told me in 7th grade was actually true because, well, I don't think I was ever stupid, but I felt that way because I was getting serious brain fog as I was working in Silicon Valley at one of the first networking companies. I couldn't remember what happened in meetings, and I quantified this. I measured it with a little game on my computer that I couldn't play some days, but other days I could. It was pretty amazing because stress was a big part of this. I monitored my epinephrine to norepinephrine ratio, and it was just almost off the charts. So I was dealing with stress. I was also dealing with environmental toxins and the wrong diet and all sorts of things that were all coming together to turn my brain off. When I fast forward this time, I'm lean. I've had an amazing career because I fixed my brain, and I did everything humanly possible to do that. I have a family, a book. My IQ is higher, substantially higher, and my memory works. I don't have this problem with, what was the word I was looking for? What was I saying? Why did I open the refrigerator? The things that I thought were normal for my brain were a sign of, honestly, pathology. And now I'm 42. I cannot believe my energy levels. They are different and amazing, and I run circles around the people who work for me who are 25. I can stay up later than them, and I can get up earlier than them, and I can do more, and I am so grateful for this. The reason I write the blog is that I thought a few other people would benefit from the knowledge that I got through hard work and through, honestly, working with a lot of anti-aging physicians who've been presenting every month for 10 plus years in Silicon Valley. I did not know that quite so many people would be interested in the things that worked for me, but it turns out that they tend to work. On the left is illness, on the right is wellness. But as we mentioned, that language doesn't necessarily work to get patient compliance. So on the left is not so good, on the right is kicking more ass. And you don't hear a lot of doctors talk about that kind of thing, but when you're practicing medicine and you position it that way, especially for the younger audience, they will respond to that in a way that is amazing, and they will not respond to wellness that way. Today, there are 3 things that we're going to talk about around upgrading your mind. And one of those is the activities you can do that change your mind. We're going to talk about nutritional fuel approaches for the mind, and I'll talk about some of the technology, both stuff that's available today and some stuff that's about to come out. From an activity perspective, this should be no surprise, but sleep is pretty important. Most of the people that I've worked with sort of blindly believe that 8 hours is the right amount of sleep. It is for some people. The only little problem is that in a study of 1.2 million people followed for several years, the data showed that people who slept 6.5 hours lived longer than people who slept 8 hours. People who slept 9 hours lived less long than people who slept 6 hours. I wouldn't say that sleeping 6.5 hours makes you live longer, but I would say that people who are healthier need less sleep. This is a function of mitochondrial activity. It's a function of all sorts of basically health markers. So if you wake up feeling fully rested, your hormones work, your brain works, and you're ready to go after 6.5 hours, it's not that there's something wrong with you. And if you take steps to perform better and to change your biology, so it sounds kind of strange, but imagine yourself in your office with someone who has sleep or even depression or mood regulation issues, and you tell them, here's a free app you can install on your computer that's going to let your body naturally make a little bit more melatonin at night. Maybe you should think about that. I've consistently found that when people wear blue blocking glasses at night, you can buy them for about $6 on Amazon, or they install these types of things on their technology, that the quality of their sleep, the time it takes to go to sleep, just drops dramatically. They feel so much better in the morning. And there's lots and lots of feedback from people on this. So I consider it to be something that I do. I have dimmer switches in the house. I'm in the middle of remodeling my house, and my bedrooms will have remote-controlled switches that turn off the electrical circuit going to the room, so there won't be as much EMF in the room, and there'll be amber lights in the rooms. When it's time for that to happen, it'll work. And the other thing, I just had a really, really cool webinar about this, but for those of you who are really into probably your own health more so than you're going to talk with patients about, you can increase mitochondrial activity and probably reduce hair loss by adding some red light in the morning. You can bracket your cortisol exposure. The likely mechanism for this is that from an evolutionary perspective, we would have seen some red light in the morning and in the evening, and during the day you see lots of blue light. So having bright white or blue light in the middle of the day helps you sleep better late at night too. So we're still animals. So telling your basic reptilian biology, hey, it's daytime now and it's nighttime now, helps your mammalian and human parts of your brain deal with things like depression and sleep problems. It is kind of shocking, the difference in quality of life when you do that.
Now, Dave, can we expand on that? Now, how would one go about getting exposure to red light during the day and avoiding blue light at night?
So the red light thing is kind of funny. For about $30 at Costco, you can buy a color-changing LED light that's pretty bright, like a strip light. You put one of those in your bedroom, and before bed, when you're reading, turn it on red for 10 minutes and see what it does to your sleep quality and how you feel. And when you wake up, your alarm first goes off, turn it on. I have those in my kids' bedrooms even. And it is surprising how much that makes you want to go to sleep at night and makes you sort of feel like more energized in the morning. The blue light thing, you want to have natural spectrum lights. I use halogen because I can get a lot of lux that way, but it's possible to also get straight blue LEDs that are like mood lights that you can buy if you're in an area where you have a particular issue with that or if you're dealing with jet lag. Best yet, go for a walk outside at lunchtime. Show your body this is the middle of the day. And it is unbelievable what light exposure does to your mood levels. Fluorescent lights, particularly compact fluorescents, are a disaster for cognitive function. If you're sitting in your exam room and you have especially those fatter, older fluorescent lights that are unshielded or that have those metal grids where they shine straight down on you, those cause parasympathetic nervous system stress in a lot of people, and they generally don't provide great illumination. So switching to natural spectrum fluorescence with good quality electronic ballasts, or better yet, high-end LED lighting or halogen lighting in an exam room can change the entire experience of the patient and especially your own health as someone who spends a lot of time in an exam room. It's amazing what just a little bit of light hacking does to make people feel more comfortable. If you're the kind of physician who uses nutritional supplements, kudos to you, thank you. And you're also probably the kind of physician who practices a little bit more on the integrative side of things. So having an office environment where you're going to spend a half hour or an hour with the patient that's comfortable for you and for the patient is a priority, and it matters.
That's great. Now, you mentioned a couple key things here in the hair loss and cortisol and such. Can you expand on that? I have not heard that before, and I don't think other people have, and that's if we get that question a lot, particularly for men and women, hair loss in middle age.
Well, red light stimulates collagen production, so it helps with wrinkles too. And some of the anti-aging salons will use a red light treatment, which is medically shown to work to increase skin collagen. And red light, funny enough, is used in chicken farms to control molting. And there is a relationship between molting and hair loss. Wow. So I wouldn't go around promoting just red LEDs, especially in the environment, as a massive difference in hair loss. But red And infrared lasers used on the scalp probably do, because of their mitochondrial activation and their nitric oxide activation and their ATP resynthesis or recycling activation, probably do have a positive effect. I've been a fan for more than a decade of using cold lasers topically for neurological inflammation and to speed healing. And I believe they probably do work on baldness, but I don't walk around with a laser strapped to my head most of the time.
Last question. So if someone is going to implement all the things that we talk about here in the next 40 minutes or so, and they can function fine off 6.5 hours of sleep, let's say, are you encouraging people to go to bed earlier and then get up earlier? Or because if someone is up late, they're likely to be exposed to unnatural light. So what do you recommend in terms of the timing of sleep?
The classical texts on adrenal dysfunction say, go to bed by 11 p.m. The problem is that some people have a slightly long circadian cycle. If you're on a 25-hour day, you're going to be a night person. And if you have a slightly short one, you're going to be a morning person. And there's also a circadian rhythm around your body's pH. It kind of depends on who you are. Some people really are night owls, and there's some interesting studies saying that you might be a little smarter if you're a night owl. No offense, morning people. And there's an argument to be made that says, why fight your biology? If you perform well, stay up till 11, 12, 1, whatever works for you, and make sure you're getting adequate sleep. From a melatonin and a biological perspective, I think it's probably lowest stress to be in bed by 10:45, lights out by 11. I cannot say that I practice that on a regular basis. Your mileage may vary. I've always been a night owl person, and I've built my life to support that. Mm-hmm. It's also a question of if you have kids, what your job, what your commute. Those things tend to be really big variables there. But if you're comfortable going to bed earlier, it's probably better. If it doesn't work for you, then it's not right for you.
Sure. Awesome.
From a cortisol bracketing perspective, I would invite you to check out one of the podcasts on Bulletproof Executive Radio with Steve Fowkes, Fowkes. Steve is honestly the guy who saved my career. He was the creator and editor and author of Smart Drug News back in the 80s and early 90s, and it was his writing on piracetam and some of the other cognitive enhancing agents that undid my brain fog enough to let me use my own brain to hack the rest of the challenges I was facing, which, by the way, included repeated exposures to toxic mold, including Stachybotrys, and very well confirmed and diagnosed Lyme disease. So I've recovered quite well from some pretty heavy-duty things. Those both resulted in fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. I've had high mercury levels, et cetera, candida. It's been an interesting life.
Yeah.
But those kinds of things are hackable, and I think a lot of your practitioners must work with those. But if you haven't heard of Steve Fowkes, he's a luminary in the field who doesn't do a good job of promoting himself enough. So Steve, Fowkes, on the Bulletproof Executive podcast. There's a whole podcast about cortisol bracketing and red light where I'm interviewing him about that.
Perfect.
I'd also invite anyone who's in the Bay Area to consider stopping by the Silicon Valley Health Institute, SVHI, third Thursday of the month in Palo Alto. Meetings are $5 to cover the cost of the room we hold them in. And Steve is always there as a member and an advisor, and you'll usually find a mix of integrative health professionals and very well-connected community members talking about the very latest anti-aging research in a community forum with a good quality presentation. So if you want to get a chance to meet one of the luminaries in the field who you probably should know, he's one of the guys. Should we move on to exercise, Mike?
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. A lot of people believe that exercise is moving your body. I used to believe this. In fact, when I weighed 300 pounds, I worked out an hour and a half a day. 45 minutes of cardio, usually 15-degree treadmill, walking uphill as fast as I could, wearing a backpack. Or I should say, and I would lift heavy weights for 45 minutes. There's a word for what I was doing. It's called overtraining. And I didn't understand, the calories in and calories out equation just doesn't work very well. It works for short-term famines. It doesn't work for sustainable health. There's something that makes me really sad is you go out at lunch in any big city and you see women who are pear-shaped because they have obvious hormone regulation problems, walking because they believe that walking is going to allow them to eat 5 more Doritos before they continue on that afternoon. And it is sad and it is irresponsible to allow that kind of thinking to continue. So walking is great for you. It stimulates BDNF. It stimulates lymphatic flow. It helps with toxins, and it's a great thing to do. Unfortunately, it doesn't count as exercise, and you are not a better person if your little bracelet says that you walked 10,000 steps a day or you didn't. I say that as the former CTO and co-founder of MyBasis, the wristband company that was just bought by Intel for $100 million. It's useful data, but it doesn't mean you burned calories that were meaningful. It just means you moved more. The kinds of workouts that cause change in people are very intense and very short and very infrequent. Doug McGuff, who's a physician and an exercise physiologist and an ER doctor and a friend, has written a book, Body by Science, well-researched book on exercise, and I've got the Cliff's Notes on my site. Short answer is do heavy-duty sprints for 15 minutes once a week, or do heavy-duty lifting with core exercises, lifting to failure, once a week. Now, you'll be sore, and then you're going to take 3 or 4 or 5 days to recover and get the hormonal effects on IGF-1 and growth hormone and testosterone from doing that. It is so different than working out, going for a jog every morning, or even lifting weights 3 or 4 times a week, that it's the most efficient protocol I've managed to find. If you talk to the average person with a family and a career, and as a practitioner say, you really have to exercise 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a week, compliance goes down. When you talk to that same person and you say, you know what, I want you to move every day, but do something fun, it's not exercise. I also suspect that maybe you could find time to work out for 15 minutes once a week. You're going to get a resounding yes, and they're going to get resounding results, especially compared to the amount of time that they spend. If I was showing my video, I look like I lift weights all the time. I honestly, the only thing I've been doing lately is the electrical stimulation and whole body vibration, because I'm kind of curious what that can actually do for me. But I have a minor six-pack, and I'm pretty darn V-shaped for a guy who doesn't need to work out a lot, and I have a ton of energy, and all of my biomarkers are looking really good. I manufacture a whole body vibration plate called the Bulletproof Vibe that a lot of chiropractors use, and it's a 45-pound welded steel thing that runs about $1,500. I designed this not for that kind of use, but for people to have in their offices or homes and to not break. The reason whole body vibration is interesting is that there are tons of studies, mostly out of NASA and some out of Russia, around bone density and prevention of sarcopenia. You want to maintain this muscle mass, and you get a piezoelectric effect in your bones. What the Bulletproof Vibe does is it vibrates up and down 30 times a second, which is the frequency most studied for these kinds of benefits. And it's a relatively small vibration, but you feel it, and you can stand and hold a dumbbell in your hands or not. You can do a forward fold yoga pose. But it relaxes you, it stimulates the muscles a little bit, but most of all you get the lymphatic flow. So when I don't have time to go for a walk or a hike for an hour, I'm going to stand on this thing for 15 minutes, potentially while I'm even doing email or watching some podcast I wanted to watch, and I'm going to get my day's movement in. It's neurologically stimulating, it's physically stimulating, and it gets that microcirculation going. So this is an option for people who are just not going to exercise any other way because they're too busy, or because they're not going to do it, or because of some injury or something. I found that to be a real technology that is a very far stretch from those weird belts we used in the 70s. Let's talk about what you feed your mind. The Bulletproof Diet is an infographic that I've created here. You can see it. You're probably not going to be able to read all of it, but it's free online. BulletproofDietBook.com. You'll just get it when you sign up, so I can send you an email when my book comes out. I'm not going to spam you on that list at all. The idea here is you eat a ton of vegetables, but 50 to 70% of your calories comes from the right kinds of fat. You don't eat a lot of fructose. You don't eat a lot of starch, but you eat some, and you don't excessively overeat protein like so many paleo dieters do today. There's 2 other innovations that I recommend for people. One is called Bulletproof Intermittent Fasting, which is many of the benefits of not eating for 18 hours a day, but not the downside. The downside of not eating for 18 hours a day is that you end up getting hungry, cranky, and tired right in the middle of your workday, which doesn't work unless you don't have a regular workday. The other thing is once a week, don't eat any protein. When you do that, you trigger massive autophagy. So my book will contain these things. In the meantime, the infographic is free. It's been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times, and lots of people put it on their fridge. They do that because it just gives them a roadmap to say, well, if I'm going to pick a fat, what are the good ones again? What are the ones that are okay but high in omega-6, and what are the ones you just probably don't want to eat? And the same thing goes for every food category. As an example, this is a blow-up of part of it. Eat lots of vegetables. Not that hard to do, but knowing what oils and fats to eat, that canola oil isn't healthy, even though it has omega-3, for instance, is a really useful thing to know. So it's all in here, and it's pretty well researched. Another thing for making your brain work better is don't eat a lot of fructose. It goes to the liver, it raises your triglycerides, gives you those problems with AGEs. It really cross-links with collagen, which is bad for you. You get that oxidized LDL. And I used to say keep fructose to less than 50 grams a day, but there's increasing evidence that even less than 25 grams a day is a good idea. One of the other things that happens is that fructose in most uses contributes to food cravings an hour or two later. The exception is actually a sleep hack. One of the really cool sleep hacks is a tablespoon of raw honey taken before bedtime on an empty stomach, or at least 2 hours after eating. Now, that flies in the face of the sort of ketosis-oriented thinking that I'm well known for, but a small dose of fructose taken like that will raise and stabilize your blood glucose for as much as 6 hours. So if you're waking up in the middle of the night because you don't have stable blood sugar, this is a way to fix that. You could probably also do it with resistant starch, something I'll cover a little bit in my new book. Another problem with modern nutrition is that biogenic amines are a problem. The most famous of them, of course, is histamine, which is a neurotransmitter that is quite useful, but in excess, it messes up your gut function, it slows down your metabolism, it gives you massive food cravings, gives you brain fog, headaches, and even things that feel like allergy attacks. Oftentimes, this is in people's food because they had poorly fermented sauerkraut, or because they really didn't know that soy sauce might not be a great choice for them. And of course, things like putrescine and other polyamines can be really toxic. And I've found there is a good number of people who, out of the goodness of their heart, because they're good people, eat fermented foods, but they don't monitor how they feel after the fermented foods. So they get kind of tired and foggy and cranky. They don't know that there's a histamine effect. So it's not just fermented foods are good for you. The right fermented foods are good for you, and it depends on the person and your own histamine tolerance. I believe that this is going to be a much bigger thing as we learn more and more about the gut biome, because some of the probiotics that are sold as healthy probiotics actually form histamine in the gut. And that can be a disaster for people who don't have higher levels of diamine oxidase, which is the main histamine detoxifier in the liver. The next thing that I recommend for brain function is considering the fact that grass-fed meat and grain-fed meat have very different effects on your brain. And it's kind of funny because even though this is a slide on grass-fed, the cow's actually not eating grass. So there's a little bit of irony in here. And the final irony is the guy who just bought 32 acres of farmland where I'm working on opening an organic farm so my kids can grow up with the right soil biome, is that cows and horses really don't like kale or chard because it's too high in oxalic acid. But still, it's a pretty cool picture, eh? That A is Canadian because I live in Canada, but I'm American by background too. Now, grass-fed meat. Different fatty acids. Grass-fed beef actually looks more like salmon when you just look at the fatty acids that are in it. The other thing, and ranchers know this very, very well, is that when you feed low-quality grain, which is cheapest, to cows, that the cows accumulate the toxins in the grain. The toxins come from mold on the grain. They come from pesticides, and of course, cows accumulate antibiotics in their tissues, those things that are synthetic estrogens. Well, when you feed a cow grass-fed meat, none of that stuff really happens, and you get very high levels of conjugated linoleic acid, which is all sorts of health benefits that are shown in multiple studies. CLA specifically affects inflammation, it affects brain function, it affects gut function and gut permeability, and type 2 diabetes. There's a pretty good case for eating some CLA. grass-fed butter provides the same thing. Speaking of butter, there are lots of studies around butter, and butter is not as bad as it was made out to be. For instance, the butyric acid in butter is known to decrease intestinal permeability and increase gut healing. Butyric acid affects NF-kappa beta in an anti-inflammatory manner. People who eat butter experience increased energy. And there's even a study that says butter eaters have less mental illness than those who eat other types of oil. So it's safe to say right now that butter is back in fashion. Butter consumption is at an all-time high for 44 years. And the saturated fat phobia, I think it's finally ending. I, for years, didn't eat saturated fats, and it was only when I read some of the research around butter and I said, you know, I'm going to eat my own dog food. I'm going to have a lot of butter on a regular basis. Honestly, that helped me to recover from the time I'd spent as a raw vegan when I believed that that was going to be the right thing to do for health. Honestly, I would eat bowls of gravel if it worked, and I'm grateful that butter works to give me the sustainable energy and the gut effects that it does do. I wrote down a ton of this research about butter. There's a butter infographic you can get. You'll find that patients or clients, when you tell them, you know, add a couple tablespoons of butter to your diet every day and see what happens, well, their hormones get better, particularly women, because as you know as medical professionals, that your hormones are made out of saturated fat. Your cell membranes contain high amounts of stable saturated fat with some omega-3s between them. Your cell membranes are not naturally made out of omega-6 oils and seed and nut oils. So just the addition of this increases fertility, very much in particular. The Bulletproof Diet is different than the diet that I recommend in the Better Baby book, but there are a lot of similarities, particularly around the types of fat that you consume. And I'll tell you, anything that increases human fertility is pretty likely to be helpful from an aging perspective, not everything. And the reason for that is that healthy animals can reproduce and unhealthy animals can't. You, if you're aware of it, should be scared by the fact that 1 in 8 couples cannot conceive naturally already in this generation. Next generation, I would not at all be surprised if it was 1 in 4. So we are dealing with environmental toxins, and we're dealing with a lack of healthy kinds of fat like grass-fed butter. And my wife, Lana, runs a fertility coaching practice online with global clients, and it's pretty darn predictable what happens when you cut toxins and increase healthy saturated fat intake. What happens is baby.
That's amazing. Hey, Dave, so along those lines, how can we, for practitioners that might have patients that don't have a Whole Foods that's readily accessible or a farmer's market, what are some name brands or tips when purchasing butter and encouraging people to eat more saturated fats?
Kerrygold Irish butter is grass-fed. It's about $3 for half a pound of it. They sell it at Trader Joe's. They sell it at most Safeways. I've been able to buy it at almost any city in the U.S. When you're going international, you can get it in most countries. Canada is probably the most challenging place. Ghee works as well, and there's a global shortage of grass-fed butter. I contributed to that, and I apologize, but I'm also grateful for it because it's stimulating demand for grass-fed animals. We need grass-fed animals if we want to have healthy soil, and if we want to live for multiple generations, we better take care of our soil.
Perfect. Thanks.
You got it, Mike. Now, let's talk about coconut oil. It's delicious, but it's kind of weak. What I use is the Spray Octane oil. Yes, shameless plug, I do make it. The reason I make it, though, is for my own use. It is a single-chain MCT, just the shortest chain of the MCT oils. It's got 18 times more of that fat, the caprylic acid, than you'll find in coconut oil, and caprylic acid normally doesn't taste very good. This has a completely neutral, like no flavor at all. So it just, you can pour it on food, and that's what I do with it. I put it in coffee and food. It is the one that most effectively converts to ketones in the body. So you can get low-level ketones even in people who are still eating sugar and excessive carbs. And the difference in how they feel and their ability of their brain is amazing. They literally, like, they got their life back, their energy turned back on. Part of the reason that may happen in some people is if they have problems with yeast in their gut. Caprylic acid is definitely not something that yeast enjoys. But the difference you hear from someone who has a teaspoon or a tablespoon is shocking. In populations of people who, especially women over 40, people who have thyroid problems, though, I recommend they start out very slow, because this stuff can increase mitochondrial function because you have the ketones that don't burn glucose in the mitochondria. So it can turn your thyroid on in a big way. One of my employees, who's 62, she had to cut her thyroid meds by 75% after she went on it. When I started making this a regular part of my diet, I myself went, my T3 time release went from 10 micrograms a day down to 2.5. So I cut my own by 75%. So this is not a thyroid drug by a long shot, but when you fix your biology, you might want to adjust your thyroid medication. I would tell you something else amazing about what C8 MCT oil like this does for aging brains, but then I would be making a drug claim, so I'm not going to do that. I apologize. You'll have to do that research for yourself. The reason people who make really cool stuff like this don't make drug claims is because we want to keep doing that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's really important for making your brain work is just avoiding food toxins. So many people eat a meal and then in a half hour, an hour, 2 hours, or even 6 hours later, they stop being able to think. They get tired. They lose focus. And what's going on there is their body is processing these toxins, breaking them down, and they run out of glucose because the liver really likes to have glucose, or in some cases some fat, that it can use to help oxidize toxins. So by telling people to cut out lectins or phytates, and in particular gluten, or one of my favorite areas of research is mold toxins, mycotoxins that are very common in many processed foods today, people feel amazing boosts in cognitive energy, and they don't know why. So then they use the Bulletproof Diet as kind of a roadmap, and then there's a free app that I make called Food Sense, and the app uses your heart rate, and it measures your heart rate to figure whether or not your heart rate spikes after a meal. Dr. Broca developed a rough test for food sensitivities years and years ago that says if your heart rate goes up by 16 beats per minute within 90 minutes of a meal, it's a pretty clear indicator that you ate something you were sensitive to, assuming you didn't do a CrossFit workout right after a meal anyway. So using that rough thing, you have a guide to eating less toxic food, and then the ability to test whether a certain meal triggered you or didn't trigger you. This is faster and more data-driven than a typical elimination diet, which no one will ever do unless they're profoundly unwell, speaking from personal experience. So all of these are as controlled for as possible in the recommendations I make there. But one of the things that I get the most questions about is what's up with coffee, because I do make upgraded coffee, which is a mycotoxin-tested coffee bean. The reason I did this is that I gave up coffee for 5 long, dark years. And I did that because even though it made me feel good, I'd feel good for an hour or two, but then I'd crash and I'd get cranky, but I would get joint pain and I'd get headaches and just a feeling of irritable anxiety that would come with it. And after a lot of work, I read a lot of agricultural research and some biotoxin research, and I realized that what's going on here is that not all coffee is the same, because I would drink it one day and wow, I'm cured. The next day, oh, I'm allergic to coffee. And I'm like, wait, I didn't turn my food allergies off one day after the other. The coffee wasn't all the same. When I got to sort of the end of that rabbit hole, I found out that there's a study that says up to 91.7% of green coffee beans have toxins from mold. This happens because insects and other biological stressors affect the coffee fruit as it grows on the coffee plant. The insects in particular introduce toxic mold spores, mostly species of Aspergillus and a few others, onto the coffee fruit. The coffee is then processed in one of 2 ways. The natural process means you throw it on a tarp and let the fruit spoil till it dries, and then you sort of flake it off, rinse it, and then it's a coffee bean. Or you throw all of the beans into a big vat with water and you let them ferment for a while, at which point the mold spores germinate. The mold spores make enough toxins that most governments around the world have put in upper limits for coffee for one of the many toxins. I test for 26 of them, But one of the main toxins that's known in coffee is called ochratoxin A. Ochratoxin A is limited to 5 parts per billion throughout most of Asia and all of the EU. The acceptable limit for ochratoxin A in the US is, oh, we don't have one. So if you look at my episode number 100 on Bulletproof Executive Radio, I interview one of the world's foremost experts in coffee who flat out states there is a problem with coffee dumping, and people, coffee producers who have coffee that isn't clean, they won't send it to Europe because they have to destroy it if it doesn't meet European regulations. They ship it somewhere else. And it's not a particular stretch to understand that that coffee is going to go somewhere and it's going to go to a country where there aren't regulations. So I set extremely strict limits for a list of mold toxins, including ochratoxin A. And I've completed a study that I haven't published yet, where for 6 weeks we looked at 7 different measures of cognitive function for people drinking coffee they bought at a corner coffee store versus coffee made with my upgraded beans. And on 5 of 7 measures, we found a very substantial difference in cognitive function. The sample size, by the time everyone washed out of the study, which was really an annoying study, we only had 17 people who finished out of 54, but the sample, or the P was less than 0.001, meaning the effect was quite large and measurable. So I can tell you, thousands and thousands of people have emailed me and said, I can drink coffee again. And the difference is that these people are more sensitive to histamines, they're more sensitive to mold toxins, and this is a problem in coffee, and mold toxins aren't good for anyone. So the difference in how you feel is noticeable, and it's quantifiable and measurable, and that's the path of how I went about creating the beans. But there's more to coffee than just the beans. Coffee is the #1 source of antioxidants. It's also an amazing source of polyphenols. But coffee triggers thermogenesis, and there's a model for mTOR, or mammalian target of rapamycin. mTOR is what triggers muscle growth. And there's 3 things that inhibit mTOR. And the way you grow muscles is you inhibit mTOR, and when you stop inhibiting mTOR, the mTOR sort of surges forward like a spring being compressed. And when it does that, that's what triggers muscle growth. Certainly there's hormonal things and there's nutrient things, and muscle growth is a complex subject, but we're just talking about mTOR's effect on it. The 3 things that inhibit mTOR so it will surge forward are, #1, intermittent fasting, and I highly recommend you do that on the Bulletproof Diet. #2 is exercise, which I recommend you do in a fasted state towards the end of the fast. And #3 is coffee. So if you do this right, you didn't have breakfast, you drank bulletproof coffee, which I'll explain in a minute. You exercised right before you had lunch, and you got this triple compound compression of mTOR, so when you're done, you get a huge impact from the exercise, and you only needed to do the exercise once a week for 15 minutes. And you can look amazing by doing things like this. There's also several studies now about the polyphenols in coffee and their effect on the gut biome. There's really interesting data on the gut biome of fat people versus thin people. It turns out if you take the gut bacteria from one and give it to the other, they trade pant sizes as well. So the difference is the ratio of Bacteroides to Firmicutes. Bacteroides eat polyphenols. That's their prebiotic. And you can't supplement those. There is no company that makes a Bacteroides probiotic. There was one company in Vancouver, but they're out of business now because those bacteria aren't particularly stable. So the way you get them is you eat lots of polyphenol-rich foods like colored vegetables and chocolate and coffee. Interesting that your coffee could be a probiotic. There are some studies about coffee that I really, really want to tell you about, particularly very large, very impactful things that everyone's concerned about, but I would be making drug claims, and since coffee is not a drug, it is a delicious beverage, you'll have to go to PubMed and type in coffee and see all the amazing things coffee does for yourself. There are studies I'm allowed to talk about improving executive function. Caffeine alone does it, but coffee does it better. The other biohack that I'm maybe most famous for is the idea that butter is better than cream and certainly better than milk in coffee. And there are multiple reasons for this, but the big reason is that casein binds to the antioxidants in coffee and makes them unavailable to you. So if you want to get the benefits of the antioxidants, best of all, blend your coffee with ghee and that brain octane oil we talked about before, which enhances absorption. In fact, brain octane oil, that ingredient is used by pharmaceutical companies to increase absorption of things. So if you take coffee without the toxins, you, in a blender, combine it with grass-fed butter and brain octane oil, you're getting a burst of ketone energy, you're getting the butyric acid and the satiation that comes from the butter, you're getting the CLA, and you're getting the benefits of coffee itself. When you blend it, you micelize it, so now it's more absorbable, and once you do that, you have zero food cravings. I mean zero food cravings for the most hardcore sugar addicts in your practice. Literally, the first day they have this for breakfast done right, they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't think about food until lunch. I just didn't care. I didn't use my willpower to say no to the bagel. I ignored the bagel. The bagel had no power. That rocks. Because I'm watching the clock and we had a couple technical difficulties, I'm going to go really fast on a couple of these slides so we can talk about some of the electronic stuff you can do.
Sure.
Glutathione for cognitive function is magic. Mike makes an amazing form of glutathione that works very well. If you do IV glutathione in your practice, good for you. If you don't, think about it. The form that I work with is called MAPD glutathione. It's a glutathione liposome bound to a lactoferrin molecule, and it works really well. Anything you can do to get glutathione into your patients is a good idea, and whey protein is not a good idea beyond 2 tablespoons a day because it tends to contribute to inflammation if you're over-consuming whey, and it's rate limited as to how much glutathione you can make from it. Another major brain fog clearing substance is charcoal. It's been used in Ayurveda for thousands of years. People think of it as a digestive remedy, but it's got a negative electrical charge that attracts toxins that are usually positively charged. I've seen brain fog, particularly in kids, but even in myself, turn around, especially after a meal, very quickly with this. A lot of the charcoal that you can get today is not acid washed, and since charcoal naturally accumulates toxic metals because it's a large volume of wood turned into a small volume of ash, I use a acid washed process, and I'm the only supplement company out there to use this ultra fine grain charcoal, where it's the top 15% finest. But let's talk about the 3 technologies for increasing your cognitive function, because I promised to tell you about upgrading your brain, and I have 4 minutes left. Number 1, heart rate variability. If you can convince your patients to do this, the impact on the quality of their life is amazing. I'm a certified heart math coach, and I make an app called the HRV Sense iPhone app that uses a chest strap, so you can monitor your stress all day long. The long and short of it is that most people don't know when their sympathetic nervous system is triggered by something in their environment, and every time that happens, their brain turns off and they get distracted and they don't know it. So by teaching people to feel what it's like and to know when their body is in a state of stress, even if their mind doesn't sense it, they become more aware of stress, and then they learn how to manage it and turn off stress. That alone raises alpha in the frontal part of the brain, and it increases your ability to pay attention and get stuff done. It is a huge health impact. Next up is Neurofeedback. There's my cool, sexy hat there. I use a program called 40 Years of Zen, which for my most senior clients, it takes 7 full days of neurofeedback, and you learn to mimic the brain state of someone who's spent 40 years of daily practice learning advanced Zen states. The side effect in an NIH-backed study is 11.9 IQ points that are stable a year later. This is heavy-duty stuff. There are much lighter weight forms of neurofeedback that do amazing things for PTSD and for people who have chronic anxiety and don't know why. If you take someone and you put them on brain octane oil, you put them on the Bulletproof Diet or paleo or some sort of high healthy fat diet that's relatively low in toxins, and then you give them neurofeedback, or you give them any other form of therapy, something like EMDR, you can get people who just are not functional human beings to wake up. If you do the therapy without the food, it's much harder. If you do the food without the therapy, it's much harder. You have to have mitochondrial energy in order to make the prefrontal cortex turn on so that you can become in charge of your own mammalian and reptilian biological systems. And this is a core kind of bulletproof teaching on the blog. The other thing that is shockingly cool is dual and back brain training. Unfortunately, this simple mental exercise is so frustrating that most people, including my hedge fund manager, gazillionaire clients, they never do it because it makes you feel like an utter failure every time you try. But it is something that is proven to increase your fluid memory and to increase your IQ score, and something that for me raised my IQ score by 12 points. I am putting together now a mind upgrade program that teaches people how to do dual and-back training and another form of creativity training, because we're at the edge of a renaissance of brain training, because really cheap systems and really cheap biofeedback are making it possible for you to talk with your patients about ways for them to make their brain way more functional. And the way someone's eyes light up when you tell them, no, you can be more than you are today, is incredible. And I think for physicians, not necessarily this specific program, but the ability to work with integrative type clients on their cognitive performance as a marker of aging or just as a marker of health, we're going to see incredible things happen. Thank you, Indiegogo. Thank you, crowdfunding, and thank you, Quantified Self, because we'll be able to tell what works and what doesn't work in short order, and you'll be able to monitor it in ways that are amazing. And thank you, even companies like Lumosity, for teaching people that you can train the brain with software in a way that wasn't possible even 5 years ago. Keeping track of the time here, it's 6:30. Brief plug here. I told you guys about the coffee. I told you about the problems in coffee altogether. Glutathione for cognitive function, ketones, however you can get them, from fasting, from butter, from low-carb diets, or from brain octane, and binding of toxins. All of those work on upgrading your brain. I talk about this stuff on a regular basis on the Bulletproof Executive Radio podcast on iTunes, and I'd be more than pleased to take questions if Mike allows us to have time to do it.
Absolutely, Dave. Yeah, we have quite a few questions and quite a few hands being raised. And so I think what we're going to do real quick before we open that up is in your chat, if you guys do want free coffee, first one to type in coffee in the chat bar will get some free coffee from Dave. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and type that in. I'll monitor the chat bar here. While we are waiting for those to come through, Dave, a couple questions. You're big on quantifying your brain function and such, and you mentioned Lumosity and such. I know that they recommend there's in-house studies and stuff. Can you give us your feedback on that?
I was on a panel at South by Southwest, the big media conference in wherever the heck that place is in Austin. And I can tell you there's good research, and the people at Lumosity are really working hard on great software, and it's engaging. And compared to the average Angry Birds thing, you're totally rocking it. That's a wonderful thing to do. Not all brain training software makes you better at generalized skills. It actually makes you better at brain training software. But that alone can make a difference. I felt the difference from Lumosity. There was a lot of in-house studies there, though. So I wouldn't say that it's a negative thing at all. I would say some of it probably makes you better at Lumosity. And they even have a little dual in-back app. It doesn't do all the stuff most dual in-back does, but it is in there. So I would encourage people to do that as a much healthier form of video game than what you can get.
Now, for cognitive function, you mentioned heart math and heart rate variability. You've been doing, HRV for a while now, but really cognitive function, what's the duration, how many times a day, things like that. What do you recommend?
I suggest for my clients that they do a minimum of 10 minutes a day, hopefully 20, but 10 is okay, for at least 6 weeks. The reason for that is 6 weeks is the habit-forming window that's pretty well defined in psychology texts. So once they get used to that, they're in the habit of turning off their sympathetic nervous system. If you can get them to do 20 minutes, that's great, but 10 minutes is the minimum required, either when they first wake up, before bed, and usually people, if they do it for 2 weeks, they realize they probably should do it at the end of their lunch hour too, if they tend to be anxiety.
Fabulous. So we do have some live questions. First one is Christiana Delion. Yeah, you're live. Welcome.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and also ask, you mentioned that casein affects the absorption of antioxidants when you are drinking coffee. So what about dairy-free alternatives like almond milk or coconut milk, something that does not have casein in it?
It specifically binds to the catechins in coffee. And dairy-free alternatives work. I tend to prefer ghee because you're still getting the CLA and things like that, and it has zero casein in it. Almond milk can have mycotoxins in it, and it generally is higher in oxalic acid, which can be a problem even for cognitive function for a lot of people. But if they respond well to almond milk, it certainly works. Anything with fat that the body likes without casein is going to increase absorption of those antioxidants. We know that putting butter or other fat on your vegetables makes those nutrients more absorbable. It's even more so when you're dealing with high levels of antioxidants in coffee or even tea. Okay. There's a reason the Tibetan, butter tea that I originally got the idea for putting butter in my coffee from. There's a reason it works. The reason it's such a big part of the Tibetan diet. It's that same principle.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great question. All right. Hey there, Dr. John.
Yes, good evening, Mike and Dave. How are you doing this evening?
Good, thanks.
Great, thank you.
Great. David, I just wanted to ask you two questions, if you don't mind. The first one was, are you still following Dr. Cruz's cold thermogenesis protocol, and how are you doing with it?
Doctor, I appreciate that question. I'm getting an echo. I hope everyone else isn't getting it too. The cold thermogenesis stuff is amazing, and Dr. Cruz suggested some pretty radical stuff about this. I followed it for about a year and had enormous benefits, and then I started traveling a crazy amount for the Bulletproof Executive, and I found I just couldn't get hotels with bathtubs where I could consistently expose myself. So the new biohacking facility that I'm in the process of building now has an ice tub spec'd out right next to a farm for red sauna. So yes, I will be getting back into it. And I have a cold thermogenesis vest that I use occasionally, but I miss proper cold thermogenesis. It just takes being in one place with the right facilities some of the time. I also use a cold glove. So cold exposure is one of those things that does increase biological resilience, and I highly recommend it, especially for people who are super sick. It's relaxing once you get used to the ice.
Unmuted.
Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that because I talked to Dr. Cruz, and he's against cryotherapy, so it looks like it's only the cold bath is the only way to do it, according to him.
I'm about to go try some cryotherapy, and there's pretty good evidence about rapid cold exposure to the very outer surface of the skin causing some changes, but I haven't talked with Dr. Cruz about why he's against cryotherapy. He's a knowledgeable guy, and I really value what he has to say, so since you told me that, I will find out and chat with him about it.
Unmuted.
Well, I appreciate it, Dave. And the last quick question is in regards to, I think it's Benjamin Rubin's new bed at the old Zeo. Have you had any thoughts or exposure to that new system, and do you think that the Magnetico bed system would interrupt that Bedit if you were to try it?
Ben Rubin joined Bedit. I am so pleased. Ben is a friend, but I haven't talked to him in a little while. I've been using the Bedit sensor on my bed for about, I want to say almost 9 months. It is the coolest sleep monitoring system ever. You can wake up in the morning and get a graph of your heart rate variability, noise in the room, light levels in the room, temperature in the room. As a sleep hacker, it is nirvana. I use that in the Sleep Cycle app on my phone. I believe it would not likely interfere with the Magnetico sleep system. I don't use the Magnetico system. I use an earthing sheet, and I use a pulsed electromagnetic frequency generator near my bed pretty often. There's definitely good evidence around the Magnetico stuff. Just went down the PEMF path instead.
Great questions there. Don Tepperman. Don, you're live if you still have a question. All right, we'll go to the next one. Jane Rohan. I don't hear anything, so we will skip Jane. All right, just a couple more here. Carlos Castro. People are getting shy. All right. We have, so that's all for the live. Well, a couple, let's see, there's one that, hey there, Kim Streeter, you are live. All right, so let's see, there was a bunch of questions that came in, Dave, so I'm just going to quickly scan through there, and then maybe we can answer them afterwards and such. So the coffee, is it organic, fair trade? Does that have anything to do with mycotoxic exposure and such?
No. Part of my philosophy on the Bulletproof Executive is that everything is a complex system. Your body is a complex system. It interacts with the environment in a kind of seamless way. Your gut biome is a reflection of what you eat. So if we can do something that's more sustainable, it's just a better thing to do. Organic coffee is no more or less likely to have mold toxins than non-organic coffee. single estate coffee, you're just flipping a coin. Since your goal is to have no mold toxins, the estate either has a mold problem or doesn't have a mold problem. You take two estates, you mix them together, you increase the odds that there's mold in your coffee. If you get a single estate that's clean, that's a pretty good thing. The question is, how clean? Well, your mileage may vary. That's why I ended up going down to the lab testing side of things. So that said, there's a pretty strong argument for getting organic and getting fair trade when possible. But even my coffee isn't certified organic, because the organic certification process, when you talk with small-scale farmers in Central America, it is devastating economically to get certified to be organic. So you tend to only find larger basic conglomerates working on that process. So I'm a huge fan of Rainforest Alliance certified, and the people I work with are they work with the Rainforest Alliance. I'm not certain that it's legal to say my coffee is Rainforest Alliance certified because there's some kind of political thing going on there. But bottom line is, the people who I get the coffee from and I work with on its production are paid a living wage designed for the workers, not just for the coffee.
Perfect. Basically, what you're saying is there's really no correlation.
No, not really. In fact, this is kind of sad. If you spray a fungicide on a crop, it's probably going to have lower mold toxins.
Right.
And apple juice, for instance, is going to have 5,000 times more patulin in it when it's organic than when it's not organic. Pesticides are bad. Mold toxins are bad. You say potato, I say potato. What you want is clean apple juice.
Right.
And that is a subject of lab testing and proper agricultural and food processing techniques. And at the end of the day, that's what I'm pushing for. I want the world's coffee to be clean, and I want us to look at food storage and preservation throughout the supply chain, because it will cause a huge shift in human health and chronic disease when we get.
The thing that I've run into with your protocol, and I love it, by the way, but is having a glass blender. And a lot of folks have a plastic blender, even the Vitamix and stuff, and I cringe at that, talking about the hot water leaking phthalates and such. What are your workarounds for that?
Limited exposure to the blender. There really isn't that much to do there. Right? I mean, you can buy glass blenders, but most of the glass blenders I found have very low quality seals, and any fat will degrade a seal, but coconut oil in particular degrades plastics even faster. So the new BlendTech blenders are BPA free, but that doesn't mean that they're free of all plasticizers, because they are plastic. So I tend to use, for cold stuff, a Vitamix, and for hot stuff, a BlendTech. I'm opening a Bulletproof coffee shop in Los Angeles and raising some money for that now. So I've actually tested both blenders, the commercial quality ones. I haven't tested them for BPA, but I've looked at the certification. They both claim BPA free. It's just that for hot drinks, BlendTech works better. For cold drinks, Vitamix works better. So if you're going to go out and buy yourself a super blender, I tend to favor BlendTech for home.
So you're saying just keep it short and sweet, blend it as quick as you can, pour it out.
The sweetener should be xylitol, non-GMO based. Just kidding. You're short and sweet.
Right. That's funny. Okay, question came in on the app that you use to reduce the blue light from the screen of the computer.
Mm-hmm. It's called Flux, and it's spelled F and then dot or a period, Lux. And the website is getflux.com without the dot in it.
Great. Well, Dave, this was amazing. Thank you so much. We'll make the recording available to everyone. And a couple of folks here did win some free coffee, so I'll send that over to you, and you guys can work it out. Awesome. Have a great night.
So much for listening. I really value the work you're doing with people to help them get healthy and stay healthy, and it's so important. And thank you for being at the cutting edge and using Zymogen stuff, because I'd love to see more doctors doing that.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Take care, Father. Bye.